I will never forget the moment I learned the truth about Kesi. He wasn't just a gorilla with unusually white fur. He was something else entirely. He was a genetically modified infant, created in a lab to be displayed. A rare spectacle for those with the money to afford such a thing. The idea that someone could manipulate life in this way, just for profit, still haunts me. It happened on one of the most beautiful spring mornings. The cherry blossom petals were falling, dancing in the air, and the Rehabilitation Center's security cameras recorded everything. But no technology could truly capture what occurred that day. It was more than just animal behavior. It was proof that love knows no boundaries, that memory is incredibly powerful, and that even a goodbye can be experienced in its purest form. The white gorilla, Kesi, saw the elderly woman sitting in a wheelchair and, with his own hands, unlocked a lock that had been closed for years. Security teams aimed their weapons, but Kesi had only one goal, a goal more valuable than the entire world. How could a gorilla never forget something he learned years ago? How could he act as gently as a child, despite his enormous strength? And, most importantly, how could he become so deeply attached to a human? The answers lay hidden in the story of a bond that even science couldn't fully explain. That human was Emma Carter, who had worked with primates for 42 years, showing them the compassion that some humans seemed incapable of. But nothing in her life was as much of a turning point as the raid she made on that laboratory. Everything changed that night, both for her and for that 5-month-old white baby gorilla. It was the year 2006, and controversial experiments in genetic engineering were gaining momentum. Emma was a researcher for a private animal rights organization, and she had been watching a particular laboratory she had suspected for months. That night, she finally managed to get inside, and what she saw deeply shook her. In a small cage in the middle of the cold, sterile room lay a gorilla infant with fur as white as snow. All the other gorillas she saw in the surrounding cages were dark-colored, natural-looking. But this infant was different, defying the laws of nature. It was covered in perfect whiteness. When she looked at the files, she learned the truth. This was one of the first genetically modified gorilla infants. It wasn't albino. It was the result of deliberate intervention. Scientists had tampered with its genetics to display it as a rare species, perhaps even to sell it to wealthy collectors. But, right then, that tiny being was living without a mother, without love, only as an experimental object. I can only imagine how Emma felt. Something must have broken in her heart. At that moment, she made a decision. She couldn't leave this infant there. That night, risking her career, her freedom, perhaps even her life, she took Kesi out of there. She named him herself, Kesi, meaning hope in an ancient language, because he was hope for Emma. He was proof that humanity could still do good, that love was stronger than science. The first days weren't easy. Kesi had been traumatized. He cried through the nights, trembled in Emma's arms. But Emma didn't give up. She fed him by warming milk, put him to sleep singing lullabies for hours, and slowly gained his trust by showing him she was there every time he woke up. As months passed, the bond between them grew stronger. As Kesi grew, his white fur shone even brighter. He didn't just develop physically, His intelligence, his ability to empathize, and his loving gaze amazed everyone, as if he was now receiving back all the love he had lost in that laboratory cell, multiplied. When he turned 3, Kesi was already too big to climb on Emma's shoulder. But he still came to her side every morning, rested his huge head on her knees, and waited for her hands to wander through his fur. This ritual was the most sacred moment for Emma, because those moments were a time for a silent conversation they both shared. Emma taught Kesi simple things: how to peel fruit, how to play games, even how to open a simple lock. She had shown him this last skill as a fun activity. A metal lock, small buttons turned in the right sequence. Kesi thought it was a game, but it was one of the most important gifts Emma had given him. The ability to understand the idea of freedom. Years passed. When Kesi turned 10, he was already over 200 kilos. His white fur literally glowed in the sunlight, while his amber eyes carried deep wisdom. Emma could no longer keep him at home. It would be dangerous and wrong, but the solution she found was the best for him. The local rehabilitation center agreed to accept Kesi. This was a professional facility designed for injured animals in need of protection, with large areas. Kesi would be safe there, cared for by experts, and able to move freely in a large area. The day she took him there, Emma felt something tear inside her. Kesi looked at her, and there was an understanding in those big eyes, as if he knew, as if he understood that Emma thought this was best for him. As she left him, Emma stroked his head one last time, whispering in his ear, "I will always love you, Kesi. You're my son." And Kesi touched Emma's face one last time. Those giant fingers touched hers, as if making a promise that he would never forget her. After that day, Emma visited him every week. According to the center's rules, she couldn't make direct contact, but just watching him from behind the bars was enough. Every time Kesi saw her, he would stand up, place his hands on the bars, and look at her with such a look that it was as if he was speaking, as if saying, "Mum, you're here. Everything is." Time was merciless, especially toward Emma. When she reached 65, I can hardly imagine the imprisonment Emma felt. Her body betraying her, strength fading from her legs, hands trembling. Doctors diagnosed amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, the cruel disease known as motor neuron disease. Within a year, she was confined to a wheelchair, her speech slurred, each word an effort. But her mind, her feelings, remained sharp, deep. That, I think, must have been the most agonizing part, understanding everything, feeling everything, yet unable to fully express it. Visiting Kesi was no longer possible. Her failing health simply wouldn't allow it. Months had passed since she'd last seen him, and the absence gnawed at her. She knew her time was short, and she desperately wanted to see him one last time, just once more. Her sister, Sarah, understanding Emma's plight, devised a plan. She contacted the Rehabilitation Center, secured special permission, and one spring morning, on a day when cherry blossoms danced in the air, she wheeled Emma to the center. As the wheelchair rolled along the main path, people cast pitying glances at Emma, but she noticed none of them. Her attention was fixed on one thing. In the distance, in a large outdoor area, stood Kesi, a white giant. Sarah slowly pushed the chair toward the garden. The spring sun warmed Emma's face. Cherry blossoms landed in her hair. But she only had eyes for him, Kesi, her son. They stopped just before the bars. Kesi had his back turned, sitting on a large rock. Emma tried to call to him, but only rasping sounds escaped her throat. Tears streamed down her face. To be so close, yet unable to see him, was unbearable. Sarah touched her shoulder. "Let me call him," she whispered. But then, as if by a miracle, Kesi turned his head. Perhaps he felt the vibration of her sounds, or perhaps instinct simply whispered something to him. When that massive head turned, his amber eyes found Emma. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Kesi's eyes locked onto Emma's. The world seemed to fall silent. There was only the woman and the gorilla, mother and son, reunited after years. Slowly, Kesi rose to his feet. His massive 210-kilogram body moved with surprising grace. With purpose in every step, he walked toward the bars. He had seen her, and he remembered her. Reaching the bars, he stopped, gripping the metal. His head bowed, his eyes fixed on Emma. Then he made a sound, deep and human-like, a sound of pain. It was one of those characteristic sounds gorillas make when they are sad. Sarah brought the chair closer, until only a meter separated Kesi and Emma. The bars were the only barrier between them. Emma, trembling, tried to reach out to him, but she lacked the strength. Understanding, Kesi extended his own giant hand through the bars. His fingers touched hers. The touch was electric. 10 years. She hadn't fully touched him in 10 years. Now his giant fingers intertwined with hers. Warm, soft, familiar. Kesi's fingers began to tremble. Was he crying? Can gorillas cry? I don't know. But in that moment, Emma knew they both felt the same pain. A word escaped her lips. Kai. The huge head bowed even further, leaning against the bars as if trying to hug Emma. And then something extraordinary happened. Kesi pulled his hand back, turned his head slightly to the side, examined the lock on the edge of the bars, and then he acted. The simple lock mechanism Emma had taught him years ago as a game. 3 buttons, turned in a specific sequence, would open it. A simple but effective system designed to prevent visitors from accidentally opening the door. But Kesi remembered. He turned the first button right, the second left, the third right. A click was heard. The lock had opened. Sarah gasped. "Oh my God," she whispered. Security guards, noticing the situation on the monitors, panicked. The alarm sounded, but Emma felt no fear. She was looking into Kesi's eyes, and she saw no danger there, only love. Slowly, Kesi pushed the door open. The metal bars creaked, and the giant gorilla, for the first time in 10 years, stepped outside freely. Security teams came running, tranquilizer darts and guns in hand. "Get back!" someone shouted. "The animal has gotten loose." But Kesi didn't even glance at them. He only looked at Emma, and with slow, careful steps, as if approaching something breakable, he moved toward her. Sarah stood frozen behind the chair, unable to move. Emma struggled to give her a signal with her hand. "Let," she said with difficulty. Sarah didn't understand. "What?" Emma repeated. "Let him." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She didn't want to leave her sister alone with this giant animal. But seeing the determination in Emma's eyes, she slowly backed away. One of the security team members shouted, "No, get away from there. This is very dangerous." I've seen a lot in my years working with animals, but some moments defy explanation. Sarah, I remember, told everyone to stop. Kesi was right in front of Emma then, sunlight breaking on his white fur like a halo. Slowly, he crouched, kneeling until their faces were almost level. His giant hand reached out, fingers so gently touching Emma's face, like she was a child. He caressed her cheek, took a cherry blossom petal from her hair, examined it, and placed it on the ground. Then he rested his huge head on Emma's knees. Everyone froze. Security, visitors, staff. No one even breathed. What they saw wasn't just animal behavior. It was the meeting of two souls, a mother and son's farewell after years apart. Emma raised a trembling hand, felt the warm, soft fur between her fingers. Tears flowed, but it wasn't pain anymore. It was gratitude. Kesi made a strange, almost human sound, a whimpering gorillas make only in the deepest emotional moments, as if saying, "Mum, you're here. I missed you. I never forgot you." Words fell from Emma's mouth, difficult, choppy, but from her heart. "I love you, Kesi." And Kesi, lifting his head slightly, looked at her. There were no tears in those amber eyes, but there was understanding, acceptance, as if he knew she wouldn't be with him much longer. His giant hand reached for the wheelchair armrest, carefully examined the metal edges, then placed his hand on hers. Their hands joined under the sun, cherry blossoms falling around them. Emma realized Kesi was being careful not to hit the wheelchair's edge. Every movement calculated, controlled, because he knew she was fragile and he wanted to protect her. Minutes passed. No one interfered. The security teams lowered their weapons. This wasn't a threat. This was love. The center's director, Dr. Alan Thompson, stepped forward. His eyes welled up. He'd worked with animals for years, but never witnessed such a bond. "The most extraordinary thing I've ever witnessed," he said, his voice trembling. "This is something even science can't explain." Sarah was crying. Other visitors silently shed tears. Everyone understood this wasn't just a woman and a gorilla. This was a universal bond, a mother and a child's love that disregarded species, time, or distance. Kesi slowly lifted his head, looked at Emma one last time, and wiped the tears from her eyes with his finger. A movement so compassionate, so protective, so full of love. Emma wanted to say one last thing, but words weren't enough. Kesi understood. He knew everything she wanted to tell him. "You are my son," she said, with her last strength. Kesi rested his head on Emma's knees again. They both knew this wasn't goodbye, but a moment of gratitude for the most beautiful gift life had given them. As the sun rose toward noon, Kesi was still by Emma's side. Dr. Thompson approached with a basket of Kesi's favorite fruits. "Kesi," he said softly, "come on, buddy. Let Emma rest." Kesi lifted his head, looked at the doctor, then back at Emma. There was hesitation in his eyes, as if he knew that if he left her, he would never see her again. And perhaps he was right. Emma, gathering her last strength, gently pushed him away with her hand. "Go," she whispered. "Be well." Kesi placed his hand on Emma's one last time, held it tightly, as if trying to transfer all the love within him, then slowly stood up, his eyes still on her. He took a few steps back, then stopped, turned around, looked at Emma one last time, and in that look was everything: gratitude, love, farewell, and a silent promise that he would never forget her. Dr. Thompson guided Kesi back inside. Kesi wasn't interested in the fruits, only looking back at Emma. Even as he walked away, his head was turned. When the door closed, Kesi stood there, leaned against the bars, and stayed like that for a long time, motionless, silent, just watching Emma. Sarah moved behind the wheelchair. "Should we go?" she asked, her voice still trembling. Emma nodded slightly. Yes, it was time to go. I'll never forget the story of Emma and Kesi. It's a story of a bond that transcended species, a love that defied all expectations. They say what happened wasn't normal animal behavior, but a miracle. The day Emma had to say goodbye to Kesi was heartbreaking. It was a real farewell, and they both knew it. As the chair began to turn, Kesi made a sound, a long, pain-filled call, the kind gorillas make only in very special situations, a mother's or son's call. People around them silently made way, still under the influence of the moment, some crying, some in shock, because what they had just seen wasn't normal. When Emma got home, she couldn't even drink the tea Sarah made. She felt empty, as if a part of her had stayed there with Kesi. That night, lying in bed, she thought back to the day she first saw Kesi, that tiny white infant, and how she had taken him in her arms, promising to protect him, to love him. And she had kept that promise every day, every moment, doing what was best for him. Days and weeks passed. Sarah brought news of Kesi, saying he was doing well, but she didn't mention that every evening at sunset, Kesi came to the bars and looked at the last place Emma had stood. 2 months later, Emma woke up struggling to breathe. The disease had progressed. She refused to go to the hospital, wanting to be at home in peace. That night, as she lay in bed, looking out at the full moon, a strange feeling overcame her, as if Kesi were beside her, his giant hand touching hers again. She closed her eyes and imagined him, his white fur, his amber eyes, his gentle hands, and that last perfect day when cherry blossoms danced in the air. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "Thank you for letting me love you, Kesi." And she fell asleep in peace. The next morning, Sarah couldn't wake her. Emma was gone, but with a smile on her face, a peaceful, happy expression, as if she had seen a beautiful dream. Dr. Thompson cried when he heard the news. Emma had not only saved an animal's life, but had given him a loving, meaningful life. How would they tell Kesi? How do you tell a gorilla that the person he loved most has died? But Kesi already knew. He hadn't come to the bars that morning, breaking his routine for the first time in days. He just sat in the farthest corner of his area, head bowed, motionless, as if mourning. Dr. Thompson asked Sarah for Emma's favorite shawl and left it in Kesi's area one morning in the early hours. When Kesi saw the shawl, he froze. He approached, smelled it, and his giant body trembled. He grasped the shawl, brought it to his face, and smelled it for a long, long time. It was Emma's scent, lavender and daisy, a scent he had never forgotten. He gently pressed the shawl to his chest, bowed his head. From that day on, Kesi slept with that shawl every night, taking it with him in the morning, protecting it as if it were a treasure. His way of maintaining his connection with Emma. Months passed, and Kesi slowly returned to normal, eating, playing, living. But every evening at sunset, he would take that shawl with him and come to the bars, sitting there, waiting. Perhaps, in a way, Emma was always there, in every cherry blossom petal, in every ray of sunlight. Emma was in Kesi's heart, just as Kesi was in Emma's heart. A year later, the Rehabilitation Centre erected a special monument in Emma's memory, made of white marble, a small but meaningful monument. On it was a figure of a woman and a gorilla hand in hand, and underneath was an Indian. Emma Carter, 1964 to 2026. She taught that love knows no language, species, or barrier. On the day of the monument's unveiling, Sarah was there, and Kesi was there too, watching silently from behind the bars. When the ceremony ended, Sarah went to Kesi's side, looked at him. Those amber eyes gave her a sad but grateful look. "You loved my sister very much, didn't you?" she said with tears. Kesi bowed his head slightly, as if confirming. "She loved you very much too," Sarah said. "Know that." And Kesi made a strange sound, soft, sweet, sad, one of those rare sounds with which gorillas express their deepest feelings. Years passed. Kesi lived a long and happy life. Grey strands appeared among his white fur, but that sparkle in his eyes never disappeared, and he carried Emma's shawl with him until he died. One autumn morning, Kesi peacefully passed away. Veterinarians said his heart had stopped, but caretakers said something else. He finally went to be with Emma. They buried Kesi right next to Emma's monument and wrote on it, "Kesi, 2006 to 2023. He knew what love was, and he never forgot it." That night, the full moon illuminated both graves, Emma and Kesi, mother and son, two souls, finally together again. And you could see cherry blossom petals dancing in the wind, even though it wasn't the season, as if Emma and Kesi were somehow still showing their love. I've always been drawn to stories of connection, and this one, well, it stayed with me long after I first read it. The idea of two souls intertwined, their destinies somehow converging. It's a powerful thing to contemplate, even if their time together was brief. And that's where their paths ultimately led to each other. They were together, if only for a moment.